sure either when everything started. And it has gone through several stages. With the United States' involvement in World War II, the production of powder and propellants was necessary. To fill this need, Sunflower Army Ammunition Plant was established in 1941. And apparently this was before Pearl Harbor, because Pearl Harbor was at the end of the year. Sunflower's war effort began in March with £1 million of propellant for World War II. The peak employment during the war years reached nearly 12,000 employees. Hercules Powder Company, later renamed Hercules Incorporated, was the prime contractor for Sunflower during World War II. With the cessation of production at Sunflower in 1946, the installation was placed in standby status until reactivated in 1951 to support the Korean conflict. From June 1952 through June 1960, Sunflower produced 166 million pounds of propellant to support the Korean operation. Hercules was again retained and has since remained the only contractor at Sunflower. After the Korean conflict, Sunflower AAP went into standby status until reactivation to support the Southeast Asia conflict. During this era, Sunflower was active from 1965 through 1972, producing 145 million pounds of propellants. From 1975 through 1984, approximately $160 million was spent on the development, construction, process demonstration, and prove-out to develop the capability to produce nitroguanidine in sunflower. I hope that's the way to pronounce it. I didn't look it up. The plant is the sole domestic source of nitroguanidine, a principal explosive component of triple-base propellant. On 1st of October 1984, the facility was reactivated and began producing nitroguanidine. From 1984 to the end of production on August 31st, 1992, Sunflower produced over 62 million pounds of nitroguanidine. Today, Sunflower Army Ammunition Plant's mission is to decontaminate and lay away the critical nitroguanidine facility and be ready to rapidly respond to the future needs of the nation, whatever that might be. So, I'd like to go back to the beginning, back in 1941, when we first got the news that they were going to build a powder plant between Eudora and DeSoto. Now, I thought there would be a lot of people still around here who came to Eudora then, because we knew we got a lot of people from southern Missouri and down in Arkansas, and I could find almost nobody, but I found one buddy who said she remembered they came early along. So, Mildred, this is Mildred Trask. You want to come up here so everybody can hear you and tell us what you saw here in Eudora when you arrived.
Did you see Freddie first?
No. That was the furthest thing for your mind. She wasn't very old then.
That's right, I was 17. Well, I'll just give you a little background on the Kelly family. We lived on a little farm on Stockton Prairie, and that's in southwest Missouri. And my dad had always worked at the farm, and he always said that he never wanted to work for anybody or carry a dinner bucket, but some of the neighbors started working at Camp Crowder, and he seemed to think that sounded okay, and the boys, my two brothers, were entering the military, so he went to work at Camp Crowder for a time. And after he got a taste of a good weekly paycheck, he decided that that was probably the way he wanted to go. And he said the only thing about the new prosperity that really bothered him was it was war prosperity. And he was not anxious to see another war. But anyway, after Camp Crowder, the construction, the contractor he was working for, when they finished there, they were telling them about a big powder plant near Kansas City. So he and my uncle and cousin came to Eudora to explore that. So they looked around for a place to rent, which the places were scarce as hen's teeth, but they finally found a garage apartment and rented it from Oscar Westerhouse. And so then early in, that was in 42, and then early in 43, he was able to rent a small house, and then my mother and sisters came here. I was a senior in high school, so I didn't come then until in the fall of 43. And my mother worked for a time for Carl Lutz's department store. But the thing that I remember about coming to Eudora was when we got out to somewhere east of DeSoto, it was a brick highway, and that just really made quite an impression. I've never seen one before. And so then, let's see if we're here. The workers were renting. It was hard to find a place to rent, but they were renting sleeping rooms and garages and even chicken houses or any little shed that someone might be living in it. And so when we lived in this little house, there was no indoor plumbing, but of course we were accustomed to that. And so then Carl Lutz had a little house at 10th and Church Street, so we bought that from him and added on a couple of rooms and a bath, and that's where we lived until my mother sold it recently. Then I started working out at Sunflower in October of 43 for the Department of Army. It was a 6 months appointment, temporary appointment, which stretched into 15 years. And some of the first people that we knew when we came here were Pearl and Paul Hadel and Lester and Eula Massey. And I'll always be grateful to Charlotte Weidensaul because I was pretty lonesome, you know. I'd left all my friends, and she kind of reached out and helped me in a lot of ways. I could probably say what businesses were here, but I don't want to go into that. I mean,
Oh, name a few of them.
well,
Maybe we'll have forgotten some of them by now.
I'll tell you, everything on Main Street has changed except trash plumbing.
That's right.
I didn't really realize that. Every business is different now. Oh, and I was going to say, when we added on this bathroom, we had to get a special priority to buy plumbing fixtures in because everything was, you know, wartime and you couldn't buy all that stuff. Let's see, the businesses. Oh, we had crank wall phones. I think ours was 2 long rings and 1 short ring. And the telephone operator always knew when Dr. Johnson was out of town and when he would return. And she used to make line calls notifying of peaches on the track or whatever happened to come in that we could go down and buy. Now let's see, the businesses. As I remember, there was a hardware store where the Caw Valley Bank is now. Freddie thought that was Isley Hardware. I don't know what it was. And then Charles Gerstenberger Grocery, and the Lutz Wallpaper and Paint Store, which is now, I think, Peppermint Patty's. Dr. Johnson's office was in there somewhere.
Dr. Johnson's office was Peppermint.
Peppermint Patty's.
The newspaper is in the paint
Okay.
store.
Then the drugstore, Homer White Uni, and that's now the Miller Agency. And then Lon's Cafe, which is now where the post office is. And then I think there was a cafe where Oberg Tax Office, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, there was.
Okay. And then Casmar Grocery, and that's now the funeral parlor. Caw Valley Bank, now a video store. And the post office, there's Brewer's Flowers there now. And there was a confectionery where I believe the salvage store is now.
Yeah.
And barber shop, and that's been torn down. now the CNS market. And then, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, I had 5 gas stations. And there was a theater, I believe, here too.
And then 2 barber shops.
Oh, there
One
was
was
2 barber shops?
Mr. Brown and Sweet Everly back here.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Bonnie.
Bunny.
Bunny.
I didn't frequent the barber shops too much. And, I was going to say, when we bought the house at 939 Church, I think we paid like $2,200 for it. And then my dad bought the 3 lots behind it on Locust Street, I think at $50 a lot. So that's changed quite a bit. Then, and then about 1946, and I'm not real sure if these dates are real accurate, my folks, after the Lowell Risk Laundry moved to Lawrence, my folks opened a help yourself laundry in our basement. And then in 1950, I believe they built a dairy tree, which is now Annabelle. And they operated that till about 1955. I think it's still alive.
Thank you. I was going to mention that if you did, that your father brought new businesses into Eudora, 2 of them we'd never had before.
Very enterprising.
All right, when I've been talking to people about this, they said, yeah, you sat there wondering whether your farm was going to be taken for the powder plant. Anybody want to give us that point of view of the farmers in the area here? Jack, I think you were one of those. Or Maxine,
Well,
one of them.
Maxine was more than I was. My grand, or Taylor, they lost the part on the south side of the state highway there. And then they lived in the remaining part of the farm until she moved to town.
Maxine?
Well, the main thing I can remember is my dad walked the floor almost every day, worrying about whether our entire farm would be taken. And then airplanes would be flying over, and he'd come in the house and say, look, they're up there flying over again, they're looking. Wonder if they're gonna take us. And then he'd worry about whether 1061, we'd just take the farm on the east side, or would it take both the east and the west? Wouldn't that road be a dividing place? And I can remember them worrying about that for the whole time until we knew where the plant was going to be.
All right, and the first people, did that say when it opened? When they started making powder? Yeah, they began in 43.
Well, they had 28,000 people that worked out there when they were in construction. And it was bumper to bumper from Kansas City to there, and bumper to Lawrence. And it would take an hour and a half. And if you tried to go south, you waited an hour and a half because no one would let you through. It was bumper to bumper. I remember that.
Kermit, your turn.
Well, he's talking about that traffic. I was section for him on the 10 highway from Lawrence to 7, well, 2 miles of 7, that's where it turned to go into Kansas City. She
Just
taught
a
me-
minute. Can you people back there hear him?
No.
Come up here, Kermit. Would you please stay out of the way? Glenn brought his microphone. Try it if you want to. It works.
I can talk loud enough. But anyhow, that was the old brick road that she was talking about. The brick road run on the 2 miles of 7 and 10 to the top of Cedar Creek Hill. And when that traffic got heavy, that was my problem to keep the holes filled. And they would take up bricks and start coming out, you know, and first thing you know, you had a pretty, and the day you saw it, you better get a load of patch material and go in there and patch it. And it wasn't really safe. Some people didn't really pay too much attention to you sometimes, and we didn't have the safety things like we just set up a barricade and red flags on it, nobody out flagging. And, well, it opened in May, and it was my duty to set up the entrance for the plant, all of the markers on the road to show where the entrances was. But the union took over. So they wouldn't let the highway department do the work. We had to go inside the plant and I picked up 2 laborers, 2 carpenters, and 2 carpenters' helpers. I had 1 helper. We go out and show them where to do it. Well, it took us 2 days with 6 men to set those signs up. Me and my helper could have put the signs up in 1 day. And I wondered how we were going to win a war. And that went on all the time. And from May till December, I left in the middle of December to go help Uncle Sam overseas. And I was hit 3 times with my equipment, pushing snow, and one time I was hit from the rear on a grader. We pulled a full-type grader behind the truck to push the snow off. And they was in a hurry to get home from work and rammed into the back, and they used to use alcohol in the radiators instead of permanent antifreeze. Well, the thing was hot, pretty new car, but set it on fire. And we always carried a fire extinguisher and used pyrene then for extinguisher. It would work on gasoline or things as alcohol that they had in the radiator. And the wind was blowing pretty good. I knocked it out 3 times, and the 3rd time I run out of fluid. And I thought, well, he's going, but it stayed out. It had the hood down enough and the fumes in there. And when I went into the service from that, I had spots on my lungs, and the first thing they asked me, well, had I breathed anything recently? And I told them about putting that fire. Well, that was it. So otherwise, if it had been spots, they'd probably put me in 4F, but they took me. It cleared up. But and one time, just before DeSoto, we was fixing a shoulder, and we was parked there out on the shoulder. And here come a car just flying, but they wasn't workers. They was just people looking. And we had the tailgate down on the truck, and they come around behind us and on the wrong side and took the whole driver's side of that car out. And you could look in and see people sitting in there, but it didn't hurt nobody. And there wasn't nothing left beside that car. And so here come a car that they knew, and they loaded them in and took them to Kansas City. They was from Missouri. Highway Patrol come, tried to get them, and here they go to Missouri. They never did do nothing with them. They confiscated their car, but it wasn't nothing but junk anyhow. Well, and then another time, at the top of east of DeSoto, they had a rain, and so the guys come to work, and guys was going home all together, and that was just a real mess. And there was a carload with 5 people in it coming from the Kansas City, and I don't know whether you know where Monticello Central Office is, out at the east of DeSoto. There's a big hill up. This one bunch was, they had a new, I can't think of the name of the car because they don't make them anymore. It was a 41 automobile, and they met head on with another car, and there was 3 of them involved in the wreck, and it killed 5 people. And there was so many people that we had to go up there to clear the road. We started at, let's see, where was it? At Cedar Creek. And the traffic was lined up, and we finally just would get around and get on the shoulder, and made it in about an hour. We made it up to where the wreck was to help start cleaning up the wreck. And it was lined that way both ways. But that's like you said, the traffic was just jam-packed on that road. And I was kind of glad to get off. And we had one bad snowstorm. And I run, clearing the roads, I run 48 hours in one stretch. I went to work at 8 o'clock one morning, and I got off at 8 o'clock 2 days later. And I went to bed, and I slept till 8 o'clock the next morning. I slept 24 hours straight. But that was some of and the powder they make, they made it, nobody was talking about the pellets that they made I had some good from those. After I got into the Philippines, we was living on 10 and 1 rations, and you had to heat them. Well, everything was wet. It rained about every day down there. Well, they was using this 105 and 155 howitzer shells, and they had what they called increment bags, and they used so many bags of powder for the range they had, and they'd always have some left over. So we would save some of those bags of pellet powder, and that's what we started our fires with, to heat our 10 and 1 rations. It worked pretty good. It made a lot of fire. And I think that's about all I got.
I have a question. When you talk about a brick road, are you talking about bricks? I mean, tell me about the brick road. Are you talking about bricks?
Those were real bricks on
Those
that
were real
brick
bricks
road,
that were
right?
laid.
Oh, yeah.
Just like
Okay.
the streets of
Regular
Lawrence.
paving bricks, and they're still some. You take a
I've forgotten that.
You mean like the old brick, like the brick streets in Lawrence?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They weren't yellow, were they?
Nope.
See, this road, the old highway, it was made in 1936.
Yeah.
And that's all pavement. But
Yeah.
it was experimental, and they had equipment, all the way up through the bottom. There was sections about this wide, went clear across with steel plates laying over it, and they had equipment that was monitoring the expansion, contraction, and they used different types of concrete to build that road, and then they picked out the ones that worked the best, and they put this stuff, the stuff that they read sat in a little square box out at the side, and we'd go pushing snow with a snow plow in front, and that we'd pull a grader behind to make it clear, and we wasn't supposed to go with 20 miles an hour. Well, I always kicked it to 40. Well, we had to get the road clear. And we hit them plates, and they was setting on little bolts, but the guys that was checking it, they was in too big a hurry. They wouldn't bolt them down. They just lay them on there. When they come back the next morning after that snow, couldn't find the plates. They was out over, because it going that fast, they just pitch them right out in them.
Yeah.
How close to Eudora was the brick road?
Well,
Is
it's,
it's way down on the other side?
Was there anyone here who was actually out there when they were constructing the plant?
actually what?
You were out there when they were building it. Want to tell us about it? Oh, come on. You've never been bashful. Why start now?
When I started with Ned Allen and I, and a couple other graduates of the University of Kansas, we were making investigations of people who wanted to go to work out there. And so,
This is turned up. Oh, I was on the wrong part. It's been a while since we had it. Okay.
well, they brought in contractors from various places. And Hercules Powder Company was the one that started out. And there were 4 of us that had made applications for FBI that had graduated from the University of Kansas. And I didn't make it. But I was an investigator for it. And they started building out on the north side and then kept on going right on back. And they made single base powder first and then double base. And one of the things I can remember about the double base was the nitroglycerin area. And one evening, just the men got there to work just on time. And they had one of these angel buggies. You know what an angel buggy is?
No.
All right. And it blew up. We never did find any of them, or any of the parts of Sunflower Village at that time, that part of it. And I was on single base powder line, making single base powder. And I had a group of men that were colored people from Kansas City and some Haitians that had come over here, or Jamaicans that came over here. Well, when the powder plant blew, nitroglycerin blew, I don't know what happened to the colored people, because they took off and they never did come back to work. But the other people, they stayed, and it was quite a deal. And then from single-base powder to double-base powder, nitroglycerin and so forth. Now you know the difference between single-base powder and double-base powder. Well, the double-base powder is you have nitrotoluene and plus your glycerin, and that's what the even rolls were. Now, do you want to know something about the construction of it?
Yeah, about the building. Were you there when they were building it?
Yeah, we were there right when it was building, and I don't know how many contractors they had, but they started this north end, went clear on back, clear on down, I can't remember now how far down it went past.
Prairie Center Road.
Yeah,
But the plant went as far as Prairie Center Road.
yes,
South.
yeah.
What was the construction of those buildings?
Well, all of the buildings that they put up and that could be dangerous, there was earth all the way around it, so that if it got a fire or it blew up, it would stay within this area. Remember that? But when the nitroglycerin plant blew up, there wasn't anything. None of the machinery or any of the people. We never did find any of them. And we
How
looked
many?
into it.
How many people, do you remember?
Oh, I don't know.
It was just a few.
Well, no,
We heard the number at the time.
I don't remember how many people were killed.
I remember the day it blew up.
So do I.
He was out there.
That's when I lost some of my good Negroes from Kansas City, and they're still in Kansas City. They never did come back. Any other questions?
No, I guess not.
When was that, in the forties when that blew up?
Oh, yeah, it was during the wars, and it would be the early 40s.
I think it's probably about 1945, because we was living north of Lawrence when one blew and it rattled the windows.
Well, when it blew up, Louise and I were living up here on the corner, and the yellow house right on the corner.
He called me up about a half hour later. I was naturally scared. I had two kids, wondering what had happened to him. So he called, assured me that he was all right. Well, they worked shift work around the clock.
Yes,
Started out there and every, when they first started building.
when they first started building.
42 or whatever got him.
I guess I would have to say something.
Why, sure.
Turn around.
Don't get it too close, just hold it out your ways.
He's used to using it.
Well, okay. He knows what to do with it then. All right? Yeah, she wants you on her video.
Well, I'm one of them that helped build that thing. I came up here in 1942, probably about October the 16th, and put in them double water lines and went from plant, well, down about the powerhouse in there and warehouse area, out to all these wells out here at Sunflower, out here in the river bottom. And last job I worked at out there on that, we welded up all the pipe to be pulled across the river. They had to put saddles on these pipes so they had enough weight, it wouldn't flood out.
I can't hear you, Herb.
Can you hear me back there? Maybe I'll turn it
As high as it'll go, I think. You need this
a little higher.
maybe. Let's try it down here. Now say something.
Can you hear me back there now? Laughter. finished up that job, I was working for H.C. Price out of Bartlesville. I went back down home and I had an offer to go to work as a fitter, a welder out here. This other contract was a plumber's permit. So I called up the local Kansas City and they offered me a job. In fact, they wanted me to go to work with Fort Reddish. We was in there. One day we didn't have pipe to work with. And went in there and they said, well, we'll put you work till tomorrow. But I didn't want to do that. I want to finish up the job. So I did, went down home. And so Mr. Price had only 2 jobs going, one in Alaska and one in West Virginia. And Helen said, I'm not going to stay home no more, take care of these kids. What am I going to do? So I called up Kansas City and they said, yeah, we're still good. So I came up here and went to work first day of December of 1942.
Gas rationing just went on. The gas rationing went on that just before we came up.
Anyhow, I went to work down in the warehouse area. I think I was around there about 2 days and didn't do anything. Then they took me up here to, well, about where that theater is out here. And they built some kind of accordion. Got down a bunch of radiator stuff for steam heat. So I got that all done, and they took me down to the north end. They put in a border down there. Well, I built an overpass for the border. So bring this heat on back south. Well, they brought me out of there and took me to South Acid, and I spent about 4 or 5 months probably down there in South Acid. And I ended up with working in the shop down there, and all small fabrication. About 3.5 days, and all I was out on the outside of the shop. We had a little trouble getting heat down there. We did burn up some gasoline for heat, because it got pretty cold down there. And they finished up that job, and I got on to construction. Well, it was really a crew that went around and put in different stuff over the area. And what Sweet was talking about there over this nitroglycerin, I ended up down there in the tub houses area, and they argued for about 3 or 4 days which line was which in there. I said, it's time to get out of here. So I went to Tennessee, spent 4 weeks. I came back up, and I went in and threw my papers down out here to this old major, and he said, what do you want? I said, I want you to sign these papers. He looked at him and he said, weren't you over here on this river job and a well job over here? And I said, yeah. He said, you've been in here before? And I said, yeah, I was worked up here with Truman, took an ocean, he wanted to save a little of this material out here. He said, you go back down there where you left off. I went back to the same crew, and I stayed there till the 16th day of October of 43. And I talked to the superintendent, and he said, I'll get you a clear permit to leave. Of course, I was still young enough that they wanted me maybe to the Army. They give me a lot of, what do you call them? Referments. So, he turned me loose, and in bill number 1, and said, you can go now. And that's the way I come in here and I bought this shop out. It's set right here where the Star Shop is. And I think about 46 I moved down there somewhere. That's about all I have to say about something like that. That's about all I had to do.
Now, may I tell you why I wouldn't stay home?
Sure. You were tired of doing housework.
No.
Oh.
We went down in Texas. Was on a big 12-inch, which was a big pipeline needed. So I said, well, I'm coming down.
24.
24, okay. And you know what we had? Well, we had, when we came up here, 26.
36. 35.
Chevrolet coupe. Well, we didn't have tires, ration was on. And you know where they took and put the tires skinned them off and put them in the other tire.
Retread.
Well, here I was, off there in Katy, by myself, and he's off down in Texas. And I was getting that ready, now get this. Getting ready to get all that done, and I was going to Texas. And I had a baby, 2 months old, and a little girl of 4. And I'm going to take out to Texas like that. Well, I probably got out there and got stalled somewhere and wouldn't know which way to go or what to do. So then he came back from down there, and that's when he came up here. And he stayed up here, I don't know how long he was up here, but I'll tell you, while he was up here, he thought he'd roller skate, and he chipped his arm. He never took me a roller skating any time in his life. So, he came up here the first day of December. This is the gas station. And we couldn't find any place to stay, as everybody else. So he had been up here, and there was a heated garage in Florence that he had been in when he worked for the other company. We stayed the first night there. We carried a cot for Patty, a baby buggy for MG, and they had a bed there. We stayed there, and he had to be in Kansas City next day. He said, Helen, you want to look for an apartment here? And I said, how? We were baby buggy. So we went to Kansas City, came back, and OSD soda, somebody said, there's a house out. Well, I think it was out in the Prairie Center. And the baby's milk was soured. So we went out there, well, we didn't get a place. We came in here, and to Gerstenberger's grocery store, and this was the blackest place at that time of night. And I might tell you, too, it was the coldest place I ever got to. It's colder than it is now. And so Mattie Kinford's in there. And her said, do you know any place I can rent? And she said, yes. George Burrs has a place to rent. That's Kermit's father. And so out there we went. And you know where they lived. Well, you know they had this rock crusher in there that you turn when you turn the corner and go down, and you went up and over it. Well, we went up and over. And pitching night, I didn't know whether it was going one way or the other. We stayed out there, and we rented 1-room apartment. And we had to go back to town, so we carried everything we had in a box on the back of the 2635 Chevrolet Coupe. So we had Imogene, and she was just 2 months old, and Mrs. Burroughs said, could I keep the baby? Well, of course, I said, well, yes. So after I left her there, Mr. Burroughs said, hey, she is so wild, she'll never come back and get that baby. So we got our stuff, and came back, and we lived in 1 room, I want you to know. And we carried the pot up, the water up, the pot down, and the water down. And 4 of us stayed in 1 room. Until in February, wasn't it? We moved here in town. And as all of you know where the old schoolhouse is up here, the colored, it was a colored church, wasn't it?
Yes.
Up here by this old school. Well, we rented it. Well, we had plenty of room. We had nothing else. And John Myers owned it. Now, I know a lot of you know him. Then, we ended up, well, I guess we went to Kentucky and came back. We ended up buying a house down here on the south of us. And Herb bought the shop. We've been here ever since. We've been here 50 years. We've 51 years in December. So I know what it was like.
Those of us who lived around here knew people who rented out the tool shed in the backyard, the chicken house, the brooder house. If you had an empty bedroom, you rented that. And then there was the first time we had seen trailers to live in. And every yard had some of those parked in without the connections people have today. Like Helen said, we weren't into the amenities all over Eudora yet. I guess they had city water, but yeah, they would have had
It
it.
wasn't, I don't think you piped it. I'll tell you about the trailer deal. I said, Herb, you'll never take me anywhere else unless you buy, that's the first time I ever saw trailers when I came up here and did stuff here. I said, you'll never take me anywhere again unless you have a trailer for me to live in. So what did he do when he went to, down in, huh? What? I didn't catch that.
He said he didn't know you were that mean.
And, Kentucky. Now, he went out and bought, went to Tennessee, but he bought a Schultz and how,
21-foot show.
okay. And we had that little
Chevrolet
Chevrolet.
coupe.
No brakes on that trailer, now listen. Our liner wouldn't start out the yard today. We didn't have any brakes on the trailer, just put the car around. If you've been down in Kentucky, well, the road isn't like that now. It's pretty good, but we went down and he could see the tail end back there. And we drove all the way down to Kentucky and all the way back with that trailer with no brakes on it.
Well, I tightened the brake. I got all the way down there. Didn't bother any. One bolt come out of the hitch. I had a plow view set up for a hitch, so it couldn't stop. But one bolt broke in, one new bolted. But I got up in the mountains coming back about halfway, and it didn't feel comfortable. And I said, I believe we'll tighten them brakes a little bit. So I got out and crawled underneath that thing and tightened the brakes up on the car. So we come on back in.
That's safe.
You're still here.
But I wouldn't pull one down there again.
No, he wouldn't go out of the yard that way.
Louise?
This is something more personal in that the children at school, of course, there were so many of them that were not very clean. And the kids all got head lice. Yeah, they got head lice, and of course, all they could do was, they closed up school for several days, I don't know, and you had to keep your child at home, and they had something for us to use, I don't remember what it was, but she had to wash their bedding every day. So we went through something like that, but,
I must have got out of that.
well, oh, they just,
I think people who weren't here then wouldn't realize that there were many more buildings that you could see from the highway than there are now. The plant area was back where it is today, but there were office buildings up there and there were dormitories. That was on the south side of the highway, and many people who lived a distance away would stay all week out there in one of those dormitory rooms and maybe use their gas ration to go home for the weekend, because I know when I was out there, there was somebody from up north of Topeka that worked in our particular area, and he went home every weekend. He had a Model A and drove up and then came back and saw his family for 2 days a week. We also heard lots of stories from farmers in the area. You know how tight-fisted farmers are. They had to be in those days. They wouldn't have existed. If they needed a nail, they straightened out a bent one, and if they needed to pat something, they took an old board and put it up. Stop me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was this was all cost plus, right, out there?
10%.
All the contracts were set up that way. So the more stuff they used, the more money they made on it. And these poor farmers would come back absolutely aghast and tell how when they finished a building, they bulldozed a big hole and threw the rest of the new lumber and nails, which you couldn't buy anywhere at any amount of money, in the hole and bulldozed dirt over it. And it just blew their minds that this kind of thing went on. Excuse me. How many of you in here worked on a powder line? I didn't, but did anybody here? What's it like?
You don't want me to tell you.
You don't want to know.
You don't want to know. Well, on the single-base powder lines, it was all right. On the double-base powder lines, if a spark would come out, of course, we had to wear a certain shoe. And if the spark come up, you didn't have to head for the door. It blew you all outside. But it didn't kill very many.
Didn't kill you, huh?
Didn't kill.
You are not reincarnated for us.
But I've been blown out the door.
Okay.
I can remember, my mother came up to work out for the plant from Oklahoma in 1944, and we lived in Lawrence, and I can remember when I had an operation one night, and she brought me down here. I had some cousins that lived here in Eudora. I don't know if any of you remember where Hoppy's old house was down there. Well, in the back of it, there was some of the, right now I call them trashy houses. I don't know how they were put together, but they weren't more, I think they were plyboard. But that's where my relation was living in. And I went and stayed with him because my mother dropped me off here. She went to work at midnight. And since I had been operating on that afternoon, she didn't want to leave me at home by myself, so she dropped me off here. And staying in that place, I think there was like 2 rooms, if you could call them rooms. There was enough room where you could sit at a table. And I don't even remember if they had anything on the floor, or whether it was boards or whether it was just dirt. But I can remember years later, when I came back here to Eudora, and my mother and stepdad had moved here, and we lived in that house then. And we had rabbit hutches down there, and it looked so much better with little rabbit hutches than it did with all those junky houses that people lived in. But you was talking about on the powder line. My mother worked on the powder line, and she wore those hard, I call them hard-nosed shoes. I don't know what, steel toes or something. They were really heavy. I remember wearing them and talking about going up at night at 10 o'clock at night to catch the bus up by the schoolhouse. And then finally she could afford a car, and she got an old 36 Chevy, and she had that and drove it to work. But she got her hand burned out there real bad. And she had about a third degree. It burned all the skin stuff off of her right hand. And I can remember in the middle of the night, I could hear her laying in bed crying in the middle of the night with that hand. It was so painful. To this day, that hand only has 1 layer of skin over it. It's really painful. Like that.
They didn't do skin grafts anymore.
Yeah. And all those streets and things like they was talking about, those streets out here and houses. I can remember our strawberry patch that we used to have there now is built with houses all over it. And then the one up where I live now used to be a strawberry patch, and we picked up there. Now we live up there. It's kind of funny to think we used to walk that and ride our bicycles on that road, plumb out to the nursing home every day to a friend that lived out there in a great big house. And now there's homes all through there. It was just pasture. So I think it's kind of good, but I miss the old days.
I think Eudora had about 600 people when it all started, didn't it, Paul?
Yes, something like that. And I think there were about 10,000.
Lois, she mentioned her mother catching a bus. Was there a bus?
Oh, yeah, there were buses.
What was that?
You could get a bus between Lawrence and Eudora. You could get right up to Lawrence on the bus and come back on the bus. We had conveniences in those days.
I mean, you had mass transportation in those days?
I went to school in Lawrence and came down to Massachusetts Street and would, out there by where the junior high school is now, and took a bus to Eudora every weekend to come back and see my boyfriend who took me back on Sunday night. With his, what, 2 gallons of gas? Was that what you had a week? 4.
Oh, 4.
Which girl did you go see on the other
I spent it all on her. My downfall. I had a fortune teller tell me today.
I'd like to say a couple more words.
Right.
I had a little experience out here. I was heading out to the Florida Tours. Had a snowstorm, and I come out here and got on, slowed the reel down, where that stop sign said, "We've got to stop there." It's up on the hill, what is it, about 400 or 500 feet or such a matter, before you got down to the highway. I thought, well, I'll just let this just ease down on that pavement. I got down there, turned around about 3 times. Wasn't no cars coming. How it ever happened, I don't know. I was just about traded that thing for a mule and shot the mule. But then when we came up here on this pipeline job, we had a truck driver, and we had a steel pipe right around the outside of the bed, all steel bed truck. Well, somebody was silly enough to get out of the line because it was just solid. He tried to get on up there somewhere, didn't see no cars coming, thought maybe somebody let him in. And that truck driver said, "Don't look to me to get in," because he said, "We're just wanting to get back into Lawrence as much as you are." So he said, "Don't try to take this truck."
Paul, we haven't heard anything from you. You were here through all of it.
He was in the mail.
I'll tell you,
He went later.
something I was thinking about that no one's mentioned, and that was about the trailer parks here in Eudora at that time. And one of the larger ones was the toll trailer park down where Lauber's boys built the house in there, just on the other side of that ditch, and back north clear to Kermit's place. And I don't know, there were probably 100 or 150 trailers in there at that time, and shacks and tents and everything else. And another place was up here across from the old high school. And that was Collins Trailer Park, right south of the park. Took in that whole thing with the exception of the old house, the owner house that was there, and the filling station. And then another one was, over here where Bill Nichols lived, Erickson's Trailer Park, and it had, I suppose, 30 or 40 in there, I imagine at that time. But there were trailer parks all around town like that, you know. And majority of them didn't have sanitary facilities, you know. Like down at Toll's Trailer Park, all those people were there. They didn't have a washroom, I know. They finally got water down there, and they had a washroom, but it was really crude. There was a family lived right in an old barn next to us up there. It was an old cow barn that they had taken the south end out where John Lanahan lived and used it for a garage. And this family came in, I think they had 2 or 3 children, a man and a woman, and it had a dirt floor, and they lived in there all summer, and they had a big blanket or sheet that covered that door. They lived in there all summer long. Nothing except water over at the house that they could get. It was amazing how they got along, but they did.
And if you had a little old chicken house or wood shed in the backyard, you rented it out, you can still see some of those in some of the backyards up there in Church Street, can't you? Dolores?
I remember my mother-in-law, Frances, had told me about out to her place, Frances and Carl Kurtz. They rented the north bedroom, remember when they lived out there by Hesper? Over on this side, they rented that room to Lee Nichols and his family, and I think she said they put a little stove in there and a little table, so they ate, slept, and cooked, and everything in one room. And they had 2 kids too.
Well, I did that.
Oh, I couldn't stand it now.
Well, I suspect that pretty well winds up. I'm sorry the Downings didn't get here. They were going to bring some friends from DeSoto. We'd have heard about the other side of the plant. But I thank all of you who contributed. And guess that concludes our program.